On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about system upgrades and modifications and their impact on programming. How do you go about being successful in modifying existing programming? What does past me tell future me? And what do we do to make sure that clients understand the impact of these modifications and their associated costs? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 74. Don't be clever.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Atlas IED, innovative audio solutions for every business environment.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today's show, we're going to talk about how to approach updating or upgrading systems and the impact on control programming. So I think that'll be a very lively discussion. And with me to have that discussion are a couple of guests that I think will have a lot to share. And before we get to them, I'd like to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control. He's none other than Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich?
West Coast greetings. Good to be back, buddy. Good to see everybody. So yeah, I'm interested to talk about this one.
Good to see you. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of fun stories. Next, I'd like to welcome back past guests who joined us probably about a year or so ago in episode 61. He is Jack Colasar from 4th-Bit. How are you, Jack?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Stan.
Thanks for being here. And Jack's an independent programmer. And I'd like to now say hi to a newcomer who's, I know, a longtime listener, but first time on the show. He is with Electroacoustics with our friend Luke Jordan, and his name is Jeff Perkins. How are you, Jeff?
Howdy, from Texas.
I did not mention that, but I probably should have.
It had to come out at some point anyway.
We certainly know that. I appreciate it. Good to have you, Jeff. So virtually every system that is done with AV requires updating, modifications, whether it's user preferences, system upgrades, swapping out equipment, or just fine tuning. And many of these updates require hardware or installation, but most impact programming. So approaching programming modifications is kind of an art form. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the specifics of that and how the way to approach that also impacts a client's perception and the success, obviously, of what we're trying to do. So, Rich, let's start off just by talking, we've probably can count on our fingers and toes 10 times how many of these types of situations we've been in. And sometimes we're working with our own code, sometimes we're working with other people's code. But what causes us to be either successful or challenged by making updates to existing programming?
Well, I mean, I think the first part is the longer you're at this, the more you start to appreciate any work that past you did for future you. I think that's the beginning. I think when you're new, the problem about being a rookie initially is that you think you can hold everything in your head and it will forever stay there. And as you get to your second project, your third project, your 5,000th project, that rule doesn't apply anymore. And so, a big part of it is that it's inevitable. And especially in tech, and we've talked about it before. We've seen an acceleration. And not to date ourselves, but I was just talking to somebody about a project that I did in 1992, and the challenges that were necessary for that. And in the old days, the upgrade meant possibly literally swapping out a chip. You walked around with a little tube of chips, and you opened it up, and you swapped out an EEPROM, and you put a new one in because you had written the program too many times. But there wasn't as much of a rate of change 20 years ago as there is now. And so we're seeing, you could go 5, 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years between a generation change of a processor with the original control system processors. And now, 3, 4 years, you're possibly looking at a cycle. And now we're moving into virtual controllers. And that's going to move even faster. So I think that it's two-pronged. One is there's always going to be more jobs that you've done out there than jobs that you're doing. So you have to constantly take a look at what are the tools that you can put into place for when something fails. And it's not an if conversation, it's a when. And it's either going to fail, it's going to change, or it's going to upgrade. And so at the beginning of any project, those are the first 3 questions you have to look at. How am I going to deal with these 3 things? Once you get past those 3 things, then it becomes a matter of saying, okay, how can I make sure that I stay profitable on these 3 things? And that's the big key, because I think that, and again, speaking as a business owner, and there's going to be different people obviously watch the show, but from the business element of it, the part that I always consider is what is the amortized cost of the project over the years? And you have to build that into the process, which is, electronics are going to go for whatever reason, and be regardless of change or something going weird. And so, I think that's the first part. And you build into your pricing, and you have to be able to take a 2, 3, 5-year look at the life of your project. On my residential projects, I offer a lifetime warranty, and I've had to factor that in, knowing that 10 years later, I might have to go back and look at something. But that is it's a challenge. But it's something I have to think at the beginning of the project, and hopefully put the steps in to help a brother out 5 years from now, than going, oh man, what pile did you leave for somebody else?
So Jack, I'll kind of bring this over to you. You're in a similar situation as I am, as Rich is in, where we're trying to run a business, but we're also trying to help our clients, and continue to support either systems that we've done or other people have done. When you're approached with this type of a situation, and you're talking about doing system upgrades, what are some tips that you would tell somebody in terms of this is a good way of going about this, so that we can make sure that we get a good outcome? Because like Rich says, we all want to be profitable, but I think primarily we want to be successful first, and I think that's the key to approaching this.
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 aspects of revisiting an existing project. There's just speaking strictly from the programming standpoint, where you need to. For me, it's making sure there's tons of comments in the actual code, because I know when I first started programming, like going back and looking at that like garbage now, I'm like, oh my god. And so like you're basically, for me anyway, it's kind of always hopefully progressing and building off of something prior. So it's going back 10 years from now, it's definitely not going to be the same. So it's very difficult to remember. And if they're actual systems, like even if they're DSPs or something that don't exist anymore, or that you did one time and completely forgot about it, it helps immensely if you've, properly documented, within the code. As far as like hardware changes go, it just moves so quickly that a lot of times, if enough time has passed, it's really going to be starting over anyway. And it's always easier when it's your system that you're upgrading. Obviously we all know that. Getting a project that somebody says, oh, they just want to change this matrix switcher out for a digital media switcher, and it's some project that you never did, then it's going to be difficult. You can't hop in somebody else's brain. So hopefully that person took the care to at least document and properly organize their code so that somebody else could come in afterwards. I think you should always approach every project like that, like as if somebody else is going to be looking at your code, because the more than likely they will at some point. So that's the way I normally approach that.
Which is very responsible coding. I appreciate that. Jeff, we kind of talked a little bit prior about that you're in a unique position where you have influence over design and also are responsible for doing code. And Jack mentioned a little bit about when there are systems where you just have to start over. How do you go about that type of a conversation?
Well, that's just what has to happen sometimes, because something doesn't exist anymore, or they want the new TV or whatever. So most of what we do, we don't do any residential. So that sort of eliminates half of the universe of how do programming projects work. So we're usually only ever dealing in the commercial space. And so those have a little bit of a longer lifespan and are able to sustain a few other things, but they also typically, they have already, whereas a family, that budget is much more expensive, that dollar feels much more weighty to them, but at the commercial level, it's like, oh yeah, rep that crap out. Let's start over. Video walls, do it. Okay, we can do that. So there's a little less hesitancy about recycling old equipment, but then there's other times where we're working with a house of worship, and it is very much how much of this can we recycle? And so then it does become a challenge. So, but I'm with Jack. When it comes time for me to take over somebody else's code, it almost is like, one, do we have the source code? Because often we don't. And then it is just a straight up matter of we got to start from scratch. And then secondly, even if I do have the source code, I don't know what that code actually does under the hood. So I'm just going to sort of mine it for information and then have to write it from scratch again. But I'm totally with Jack on the perspective of I know that I'm writing the code. I know that I'm going to be testing it in the shop, but then I also know that I'm going to have a guy that's going to go do the physical installation and going to be on site. And I have a team of people, because I'm at an integrator. We're interested in all the phases of the game. And so I'm going to have a guy that's going to be going back out in 12 to 24 months on service calls. And when we crack back open that code, future Jeff is going to be really mad at past Jeff if we haven't written it clearly. And so, yes. So my MO is write it basically somewhat standardized, but basically, so we've the touch panel has to work and change its pages. So let's not invent new ways to make touch panels change pages. There's no reason to not do that the same way over and over and over. And then I can teach my field tech, hey, all right, if you ever do have to open the code, one, you're going to call me, we're going to do this together. But here's how I do it over and over and over. And every project that you walk onto is going to look and feel familiar under the hood, because I'm intentionally thinking about you're standing in that closet, not me. I really don't want either of us standing in that closet trying to make it work, because, oh my gosh, it's no fun to be standing in a rat closet at 3 a.m. trying to make something work. That's no fun for anyone. So don't be clever.
So I want to follow up on that, and I'm going to actually ask Rich to comment on it a little bit, because we've had this conversation about, and I love the idea of, past me and future me, so, how do you balance innovation? And Rich, you could maybe share a little bit about this. How do you evolve your skills and balance innovation and still be able to have that type of consistency? Because come across it myself, and and I can't say right now that I am doing actively writing code, but I remember days where I'd be able to say, this was me before I adopted my current style. So, for people that need to get into your code, or even for yourself, how do you go about that, where where you're being consistent but also being innovative?
Well, what I've discovered that's helped us, and it's really been only the past 2 years that I've made like a dedicated effort on, no matter the size of the project, no matter the scope of the project, is making use of the collaboration tools that are out there. Um, it's if you're not using some form of centralized collaboration tool, as a contract programmer, even, if you're a contract programmer, you're a third party, service provider. If you're a third party service provider, you better be doing it, period. Flat out. If you're in an organization, that's a bigger ship. You have to kind of steer left and right depending on the size of the organization. So I'm going to speak as a third party provider. I Absolutely. The first thing that I do is I find out whichever company I'm collaborating with, what their tools are that they use to communicate. So whether they're a Slack house or they're Google House or Zoho or any of these, the first thing that I do is I create that centralized document within their ecosystem. So say they use Google. Well, great. We create the master Google sheet that project lives on. And what we've been doing so far is we've been taking that document, which has everything that we need, network ports, IP addresses, stuff that you should be putting in your program anyway, but sometimes there's certain things that you can't fit in there, and we've just been embedding it in the unit, which, again, future me and past me, now future me can go, oh, wait, where did I put that? What directory? I can take a look inside a unit and pull that and go, oh, that's what I meant to do. There is luxury now where, again, we were talking about in 1992, I had 16K of RAM to work with. So I couldn't put a whole project and the documentation and the drawings and everything that I need in there. So, the thing that we forget is that these processors have storage space. And it's not only a matter of what you keep, and yes, you should be using version control software and Scrum techniques and all of these others that are programming specific. But more importantly, we're providing a service. We're still the facilitators. And more so than ever, we're that repository of information. Again, you get a call from a tech. Well, I'm plugging this, I've got this unit in and the codecs plugged in. Oh, yeah, by the way, did you notice that this unit is on a subnet unit because you are in a bank or you're in a hospital or you're in a government facility that this thing technically can't have internet access. So you specifically have to put it here. If you don't put it here, nothing works correctly. Well, again, if those notes aren't there somewhere, first case is obviously the program comments, be able to pull it up and take a look at it. But the second thing is that secondary, all of those backup situations, to be able to refresh your memory, be able to pull it up. But like I said, at this point, the first thing that we have now is we have a communication channel that's opened with whoever the team is that we're working on. So we've got field techs, we have engineers, we have the salespeople, we have the programmers. So we maintain a dedicated communication channel for that project that we can archive. And then you go back two years later, and you can pull that archive back up and say, here's what happened in the field. Here are the changes they made. Second thing that we do is we have that documentation. And again, with cloud services, if you're not using these, if you're not archiving them, you are doing yourself and whoever you're working with a disservice. And it's your responsibility to maintain it. You have to be the gatekeeper of that information. At that point, then, you are the value-added service, right? Because, again, we've talked about it. The whole world is all about, no programming required, or, it auto-programs itself, auto-magically. No. I mean, there's still...
I know. They say that, but they're wrong.
Absolutely. And I'm not necessarily worried about our career spans anytime soon. But more importantly, the transition needs to be we're going to be working with IT more closely. We're already continuing to, again, I'm doing more networked audio in the past year than I have in the 5 years prior combined. And it all comes down to information because you don't have physical connections anymore. And it's silly, but it's true. You can't walk into a rack anymore and pick out a little cable and see a label on it and reference it on a drawing because they don't physically exist anymore. Those connections aren't physical anymore. So it's even more important to have some form of archive to be able to get in on. And like I said, this one's a big one for me because I'm bad. I'm still bad at it. I'll admit it. It's a pain in the butt to go, okay, new project, and whether it's a small house, whether it's a big house, whether it's 50 huddle spaces, I have to take the 15 minutes at the beginning of every project and go click. Is the documentation set up? Is the communication channel set up? Are these things set up? They may not use it, again, and I have to kind of bring them along. But if I set the standard that this is how it works, again, like I said, it's not necessarily for when you're right in the middle of a project, because we've all been at the project. There's this rush to the finish line. Everybody's keeping that information in the head. You've got 50 emails that go back and forth and 17 text messages, all of these things. You got to push it all back to the center. Because once you retain it there, you can archive it. And that is what, like what I call the tribal knowledge, right? That's where the tribal knowledge of a project is, right? That archive, that information. And now more than ever, we can access it. It just doesn't go into the ether anymore after, 50,000 emails prior. So yeah, I'm a little hot about that one because, like I said, I'm on it and on it and on it because that's what I feel I'm bringing right now to the companies that I work with. I'm bringing with them that diligence on a project so that they're not hemorrhaging 2 years later.
Jack, I'll I think you could probably relate to a lot of this stuff, with regard to the value that we provide. And we actually talked about that in our last, one of our recent podcasts, how programmers do a lot more than just write code. And you mentioned about documentation and, what about how do we keep good records and do file revisions? And, because one of the bigger ways to stub your toe is modify a program that may not be the latest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, and typically when you go in and work on somebody else's, that's always the big thing. Like you talk to the owner and they're like, oh yeah, I have the source code. And like, there's probably a 6 out of 10 chance that this is not current, but okay. For me, when I moved on to my own, that was one of the huge benefits is that I now get to choose how I'm versioning and storing all of my documentation personally. And for me, I moved on to get to a proper versioning system, and it's just so much easier for me to put the changes in and not have to have 9 million different file revisions of the same file. The same, it's the copy and copy and copy. So keeping that, in the cloud. And then I also at home in my office, I've got, a desktop set up. And then when I go out into the field, I've got a laptop. So I just go into the laptop and, just pull down the latest source and I'm good to go from there. So it allows me to be mobile. It allows me to track all changes properly. And then within those same directories per project, I also keep similar to what you're saying, all the IP address schemes. Because not only like networked audio, but obviously network videos, especially in the commercial. I'm almost, I'd say probably 50%, if not more, is network video now, as opposed to digital media or something else. So, all of that IP scheming, passwords, whatever, keeping it in a centralized spot. And then I also try to share, I personally use Microsoft now. I used to use Google. I moved to Microsoft. And so I keep shared directories for my clients so that they have access to a separate folder that has their source code, that same documentation. And then I always put my source code on the processor as well. Every processor, whether it's Crestron within the archive or AMX is the SRC, it's just, I just always, they can have it. I don't care. I don't care if anybody uses my code, whatever. So for me, and that's different for a lot of people, but for me, I'm providing a service. I'm not providing, it's just words. So on a piece of paper, so, or, in a file. So for me, I'm getting paid to provide that service so they can have the source code, do whatever they want with it, as far as I'm concerned.
Jeff, you mentioned about having other people in your team modify code. And I think that, for you, it's a little bit different because I would imagine more of the projects that you upgrade are your own projects, but I'm sure that there are some that are not. How does the conversation go with a client about what ifs when you're in these types of situations? And hopefully there are not things that we cause, but there are going to be a lot of unknowns, especially for systems that are much older.
Yeah, when we're taking on somebody else's problem and trying to fix it, there's just a conversation that takes place about, as Jack said, maybe this is the code, maybe it's not. And for the most part, we're going to say it's not, because we know that in our own case that it's not most of the time, that we have the source and we can point you to the source. But when we walk onto somebody else's project that we're trying to fix, and this is what we're talking about, we fundamentally can't trust that what they have is actually running. And often it's also because something is broken. And so it's going to need to be repaired and or replaced. And in that, now we're talking about, do you really want to keep, and plus half the time, so one of the things that I spend a lot of time really laboring over is the GUI of the touch panel. And for the most part, when we're walking into somebody else's place that we haven't owned before, the touch panel is terrible and they don't know how to use their system, and they frankly don't like using their system, and they only kind of know how to use their system. And now the thing's broken, and so we don't even know anymore, can you even make it work? And so the conversation usually turns around, we can make it work, but here are the challenges. We don't have the code. We don't have the touch panel code. We probably can't we're just in a really tough situation. And so we got to talk about how do we get back to a full working system. It's difficult.
So one of the things you touched on before that I wanted to see if you could expand upon is that a lot of times you look at a system and the solution is, this is not the equipment that we work with. We're going to replace it with what we do work with. What goes into that decision-making criteria? Because, I've always told people that it doesn't matter what the brand on the equipment is, it all works. It's how it's programmed that is the difference maker.
Right. Hopefully I didn't give the impression that our answer is rip all this stuff out and put in this other manufacturer. That isn't the answer, and that's not what I meant to provide, as much as
that does happen though.
Certainly.
And I hate that. Yeah, that rip out a perfectly good control system, and just because that the new integrator doesn't happen to.
Yeah, no, that for sure, and that's not what I was meaning to represent. It was more of, often we come into situations where your equipment's really old. Extron doesn't really make 5-wire switchers anymore. Perhaps we should move forward from that technology. And no, you don't really need VGA anymore. No, let's not do that. Let's not but I need a VGA connection. No, you really don't. But I got a laptop that does. No, you actually don't. And if you do, just throw it in the bathtub for a minute, and you'll be so thankful to have a brand new laptop that has HDMI or something. So for us, it's really more of, let's let go of the really old technology. It's not that we can't make it work. The Extron code is fantastic and has been the same for 25 years. And there's nothing simpler than telling an Extron switcher what to do. But yeah, let's move forward and adopt the appropriate technology for the time. That's more of where we find ourselves sometimes in, Steve. But yeah, we wouldn't want to rip out a system just because we're more comfortable with brand A over brand B. But now, perhaps I'm also, to turn the tables a little bit, I am in the apparently luxurious position of being able to have a team that meets with the client. And this is actually expanding my mind for a minute because I get direct influence over how the salesmen interact with clients. I get to pick I've been drawing in AutoCAD this last week on how to make a networked audio and video system at a brand new conference center. So I have this luxurious position of, I'm picking the product, I'm making sure that it's going to integrate correctly, and then I get to do the integration. And so for us, because we get to own the whole process from the front door to the back door, and then get to stick around and do the service as well, there's actually a lot of intentionality about picking products, making sure they work together, making sure that we can make them work together, and making sure that we have happy clients that don't have problems in the long run.
I think that's a really good place to stop, and a very, very good advice. And I think along with that, it also means that there's a little bit more emphasis on making sure that you're going to write code too, that you're going to be happy with, because it's representing you, and all of that is going to impact what you're going to be able to do in the future. So, and I wasn't implying that you were trying to swap brands. It's a good topic to discuss, because I think it often happens, to Jack's point. So thank you guys for being part of this show. I think it was a great conversation, as I anticipated. I'd like to thank Jack Colasar from Fourth Bit. Jack, how can people reach you, learn more about your company and what you're up to?
They can visit the website. It's Fourth Bit, it's the number 4, thbit.com, and can go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks for being with us. Jeff, hopefully this is a good experience, and we'll tell Luke that his spot may be taken in the future. And thanks for being with us. How could people get in touch with you and learn more about electroacoustics and Fort Worth, Texas?
Sure. Yes. Okay. So our website is www.eavi.com, Echo Alpha Victor Indigo.com. My email is jperkins@eavi.com. And I have a Twitter, but I don't really do the AV and the AM thing too much. A little bit. I don't know. I'm a little bit. I used to do a lot, but now I don't really. But anyway, I'm at Perkins_Jeff on Twitter. Don't at me, bro.
Uh-oh, you're in trouble now. And last but not least, Rich, another good show. How can people get in touch with you and learn more what you're up to?
A couple of places, obviously. You type my name into the interwebs and random things will pop up. You can find me at our website, fregosadesign.com. You can find me on Twitter at rfregosa, but I will say once, I will say always, the best place I hope you find me is here on AVNation.tv on our suite of shows, either with my good friend Steve or my occasional appearances on Resi Week with Matt Scott.
And to add to that, please, while you're at the website, AVNation.tv, visit the supporters and thank them for making this show and other shows possible. To reach me, Steve Greenblatt, my company can be found at controlconcepts.net, or very easy to find on social media at Steve Greenblatt. But we also want to hear from you. As I mentioned on a lot of shows, we're looking to make sure that this show is speaking to the topics that are timely and important in the industry, and we want to get feedback. So please reach out to us, and we're also welcoming new guests on the show. So please reach out to Rich or myself, or leave a message on the AVNation website. Other than that, that's all we have for today for A State of Control.